Fortunes once rose and fell on the color of a snail. This is the story of 20 vanished luxury goods, the secret engines of ancient economies that powered empires before disappearing without a trace. By the end, you will understand how the relentless human chase for the rare and beautiful has repeatedly built, and then shattered, entire worlds of wealth. How did a single plant become so valuable it was harvested into oblivion, and what sacred blue was lost when a temple fell? The answers reveal a startling pattern about the true fragility of our desires. What does it say about us that our most prized possessions are often the ones we cannot keep? But this was not a world of mass production or digital markets. Think instead of a vast, whispering network of trails across deserts and mountain passes, of wooden ships navigating by the stars on uncharted seas. This was the true engine of ancient opulence, a global web spun not from silk threads, but from human desire. For the elites of antiquity, a luxury good was far more than a beautiful object. It was a physical piece of divine power, a seal of political authority, a key that unlocked the highest tiers of society. Consider the frankincense burned in temples, its smoke carrying prayers to the heavens, or the lapis lazuli ground into sacred paint for depictions of gods. These were not purchases, they were investments in cosmic order and earthly rule. This profound need created the arteries of the ancient world. The Silk Road was not just for silk, the incense route not merely for fragrance. They were the original internet, transmitting ideas, faiths, technologies, and devastating plagues alongside bolts of cloth and sacks of pepper. The hunger for these exclusive items pushed the boundaries of the known world. It funded the construction of specialized ships, the breeding of hardier pack animals, and the founding of oasis cities in the dead heart of deserts. It sparked alliances and ignited wars over control of a single mine or a distant grove of trees. This relentless economic force, powered by the human craving for the rare and the symbolic, sets the stage for our journey. It explains why the loss of a single commodity could ripple into catastrophe, collapsing trade networks and toppling kingdoms that had built their wealth upon a vanishing dream. Our first vanished treasure emerges from this very landscape, a scent so precious it was literally worth its weight in gold. The scent of divinity and power had a color, and that color was a purple so deep it appeared to be liquid night. This was Tyrian purple, the first vanished luxury on our list, and its story begins not in a royal court, but in the shallow, sun-drenched waters of the Mediterranean. For over a millennium, the most powerful people on Earth were literally clothed in the essence of a sea snail. The process was as revolting as it was ingenious. Harvesters would crack open the shells of the murex snail, extracting a tiny gland that secreted a milky, yellowish fluid. When exposed to sunlight and air, this fluid underwent a miraculous transformation, cycling through a spectrum of colors before settling into that legendary, indelible violet. But the magic came with a cost. The mountains of rotting shellfish shells needed to produce even a single bolt of cloth created a stench so profound that ancient writers described the dyeworks of Tyre as a place you could smell long before you could see it. This was an industry built on scale and suffering, where thousands of creatures gave their lives for a few precious drops of color. The economics were staggering. To dye the trim on a single Roman senator's toga required the glands of perhaps 10,000 snails. This made a pound of Tyrian purple dye worth, quite literally, more than 3 pounds of gold. It was an equation of exclusivity that empires were built upon. In Rome, sumptuary laws explicitly forbade anyone below the rank of senator from wearing this sacred hue. The emperor alone could wear a toga dyed completely in Tyrian purple. To see that color approaching was to see the living embodiment of the state itself. The industry's collapse was as dramatic as its rise. With the fall of Constantinople in the year 1453, the last major center of production and the deepest knowledge of the complex, multi-step extraction process were lost. The secret formulas vanished, the specialized vats were destroyed, and the vast trade networks that supplied the imperial courts dissolved. What remains today are only whispers, faded patches of color in Byzantine mosaics, descriptions in ancient texts that we can no longer fully replicate, and a name, Tyrian, that echoes a wealth and a status now utterly beyond our physical grasp. The purple of emperors did not fade gently, it was extinguished, leaving us to wonder if we will ever again see the true color of ancient power. From the sea's imperial purple, we journey to a sun-baked hillside and a plant whose worth was measured not in color, but in its promise of life itself. Was a giant fennel that grew only in a narrow strip of North Africa, near the Greek colony of Cyrene. To the ancient world, it was nothing short of a miracle. Its resin was a prized seasoning, a sophisticated flavor for gourmet Roman dishes. Its sap was a trusted medicine, prescribed for ailments from sore throats to digestive troubles. But its most legendary and whispered about property was its alleged power to prevent pregnancy. This combination of culinary delight, medical utility, and profound personal agency made perhaps the most comprehensively desired commodity of its age. The economy of Cyrene was built entirely upon this single, fragile plant. Its image was stamped onto the city's coins, a bold declaration that their wealth grew from the earth. For centuries, Cyrene enjoyed a staggering monopoly, shipping in specially designed containers to an eager Mediterranean market. The demand was insatiable, and therein lay the tragedy. Resisted all attempts at cultivation. It thrived only in its specific native soil and climate, a wild gift that could not be farmed. The relentless harvesting, season after season, slowly stripped the land. By the 1st century after the Common Era, the reports grew grim. The great Roman naturalist Pliny the Elder recorded what many feared, that only a single stalk of had been found, and it was sent as a curiosity to the Emperor Nero. After that, silence. The plant was gone. The loss of is one of humanity's first clear records of driving a species to extinction purely for economic gain. It is a stark, ancient lesson in unsustainable demand. A city's coins became relics, bearing the image of a ghost. A world lost a piece of its flavor, its pharmacy, and its potential, because the desire for it could not see the end of the supply. This pattern of loving a rarity to death would echo again, but our next story shifts from a living plant to a crafted object of such beauty and fragility that its very existence belief. Yet the same sea snail that clothed emperors in purple also held the secret to the color of heaven. Beyond the imperial violet, a specific luminous azure was extracted from the murex, a hue so sacred it was believed to be a fragment of the sky itself. This was not the purple of earthly power, but a royal blue reserved for the divine. In ancient Near Eastern traditions, particularly within Hebrew texts, this color was known as. It was commanded for use in the most sacred of contexts, woven into the robes of high priests and tied as ritual fringes on garments, a constant visual reminder of a celestial connection. The belief was profound, that this specific shade mirrored the very appearance of the divine throne, making it not a mere dye, but a tangible thread linking the human and the holy. Producing this exact azure, however, was a feat of alchemy as precise as it was secretive. While it came from the same family of snails as Tyrian purple, it required harvesting a different gland and employing a distinct, delicate chemical process involving exposure to sunlight under specific conditions. This knowledge was not widespread. It was the closely guarded legacy of a few artisan communities along the Phoenician coast. For generations, these masters of color held the recipe for sky in their hands, supporting a niche but deeply significant economy centered on faith. The disappearance of this sacred blue is a direct consequence of historical conflict and cultural dispersal. Following the Roman destruction of the Second Temple in Jerusalem in the year 70 and the subsequent forced dispersion of communities, the fragile chain of transmission was shattered. The artisan guilds were uprooted, their workshops abandoned, and their oral traditions lost in the trauma of exile. With no written formula to consult, the precise method for creating vanished into the past. What remained was a commandment without its color, a divine instruction missing its key ingredient. For centuries, this loss turned a color into a profound mystery, Was it a deep indigo, a bright cerulean, or a violet-tinted blue? Scholars and chemists have debated and experimented for generations, attempting to reverse engineer the ancient process from cryptic texts and fragments of stained cloth. The modern quest to rediscover is more than a chemical puzzle. It is an attempt to reclaim a lost wavelength of the sacred, a color that once made the invisible visible. Its absence reminds us that some luxuries are not about wealth, but about meaning, and that the most devastating losses are often those that sever a community's tangible link to its own spiritual imagination. This search for a vanished color leads us to a different kind of loss, one not of hue but of sound, where the very song of an empire fell silent with the disappearance of a single, irreplaceable tree. The sacred blue of was a color meant to be seen, but the next treasure on our list was a fragrance meant to be experienced, a scent so potent it could fill an entire house with the aroma of devotion and distant mountains. Nard, also known as spikenard, was not a mere perfume, it was liquid geography. Its source was a humble flowering plant that clung to the high, rugged slopes of the Himalayas. To transform it into the precious oil of antiquity required an almost unimaginable effort. The plant's hairy roots were painstakingly harvested, dried, and then steamed to extract a thick, aromatic resin. This essence was then diluted with a base oil, creating a substance so valuable it was transported across continents in sealed alabaster jars, vessels chosen specifically to protect its integrity from the harsh sun and the long, dusty miles. The journey from the mountains of Nepal and India to the palaces and temples of Rome and Jerusalem was a feat of endurance, traversing the Silk Road's treacherous high passes and the bustling ports of the Indian Ocean. This immense journey baked its cost into every drop, making nard, by weight, more expensive than gold. Its value, however, was measured in more than currency. Its intense, musky, and deeply woody scent carried a profound symbolism. In sacred rituals, it was used to anoint kings and consecrate temples, its rich aroma signifying the setting apart of someone or something for a divine purpose. In the secular world of the elite, it was the ultimate marker of sophistication, a personal fragrance that spoke of unimaginable wealth and access to the farthest corners of the earth. This dual identity, both sacred and profane, is captured in one of its most famous mentions, where a woman breaks an alabaster jar of pure nard to anoint the feet of Jesus, an act described as one of extreme humility and extravagant love. The fragrance that filled the room that day was the smell of an entire economy, a global network of desire made manifest. Yet this network proved fragile. The decline of nard was a slow fading, not a sudden snap. Shifting political powers in the regions between its Himalayan source and its Mediterranean consumers disrupted the overland caravan routes. The rise of sea trade offered alternatives, but also introduced new and different aromatic competitors like saffron and more easily cultivated flowers. Crucially, the knowledge itself began to dissolve. The specific ancient cultivar of the plant and the precise, generations-old methods for preparing the true sacred oil were arts passed down through communities along the trade route. As those communities were displaced or as demand shifted, the art was lost. What we have today called spikenard is likely a cousin, a similar plant, but not the exact same treasure that traveled in alabaster jars. The true scent of ancient nard, that specific aroma of devotion and extreme luxury, is a ghost. We can read about its power to move people, but we can never truly know the fragrance that once made a room feel holy, a scent that literally evaporated from history, leaving behind only stories and empty stone vessels. The fragrance of nard spoke of distant mountains, but another leaf carried the scent of an entire empire's kitchen and pharmacy. Often mistaken for cinnamon in ancient texts, was in fact the leaf of a specific tree native to the shadowed hills of Assam and Nepal. To the Roman world, this unassuming leaf was a cornerstone of luxury, a versatile treasure that perfumed the wealthy, soothed the ill, and most famously, seasoned the most elaborate Roman condiment of all, a fermented fish sauce called A single recipe from a first-century cookbook calls for a staggering list of ingredients including pepper, mint, rue, and a healthy dose of crushed leaves, creating a flavor profile that was complex, aromatic, and astronomically expensive. Obtaining these leaves was an epic logistical puzzle. They did not come from a controlled Roman province, but from deep, independent hinterlands. A complex chain of middlemen, local traders, and regional kingdoms facilitated their journey. Leaves would be harvested, dried, and bundled, then passed from hand to hand across the Indian subcontinent, eventually reaching ports on the western coast where Roman merchants waited. This long, opaque supply chain was the source of both its mystique and its staggering price. By the time a bundle of leaves reached a Roman marketplace, it had accrued the cost of every hand it passed through, every tax levied, and every risk taken on the long ocean voyage around India. It was worth, quite literally, a small fortune per pound. This insatiable demand did more than fill Roman pantries, it actively reshaped the map. The pursuit of and other Indian spices drove Roman exploration deeper into the Indian Ocean, funding voyages to locate the source and cut out the costly middlemen. It was an economic force pulling ships toward the horizon, yet this very complexity became its Achilles heel. The knowledge of exactly which tree, in which valley, and how to properly cure its leaves was not held in Rome, but dispersed among those faraway communities and traders. When the Roman economy began to fracture in the 3rd and 4th centuries, the stable demand and the secure shipping lanes that made this intricate network viable started to crumble. As direct trade routes shifted and fragmented, the specific pathways of knowledge were broken. The leaf, once so central to the Roman idea of sophisticated living, gradually faded from use and memory. It was not harvested to extinction but simply forgotten by the markets that once craved it, reduced from a celebrated luxury to a mere footnote in old botanical texts. Its disappearance was a quiet one, the slow dimming of a once bright strand in the web of global trade, reminding us that some treasures vanish not with a bang, but with a fading whisper of forgotten taste. The ghost had a pungent cousin, one that filled the Roman world with a scent both beloved and notorious. Before the spice known as arrived from the east, the kitchens of Rome were dominated by a powerful resin called. Harvested from a giant fennel plant native to the same North African region as the lost, this substance was the ultimate savory paradox. To the modern nose, its aroma when raw would be shockingly strong, a blend of cooked garlic and sulfur that could clear a room. Yet to the Roman palate, when used with a master's touch, it was the secret soul of sophisticated cuisine. It was believed to sharpen flavors, aid digestion, and elevate even the simplest dish into something worthy of a banquet. Its value was not just culinary, it was a cornerstone of national wealth. When Julius Caesar seized the treasury of his rival Pompey, the inventory listed a staggering prize, over 1,500 pounds of pure resin, a hoard considered as vital to the state's assets as silver or gold. This was a spice that funded legions, but this demand created a familiar and tragic cycle. The plant, like its relative, resisted cultivation. It grew wild, and the relentless tapping of its roots for their precious sap could not keep pace with the insatiable appetite of an empire. Within a few centuries after Caesar's time, the reports grew scarce. The true North African, the original, was harvested into probable extinction. Its disappearance, however, did not end the Roman craving for that pungent kick. The search for a substitute led merchants eastward, to Persia and Afghanistan, where they found a plant producing a similarly powerful resin. While it filled the functional gap, it was a different beast. Connoisseurs of the time noted the substitution, lamenting that the new spice was an imitation, a shadow of the original's complex depth. The unique flavor that had defined generations of Roman cooking, that specific note woven into the fabric of daily life from street food to imperial feasts, evaporated from the world. One empire's indispensable taste became another era's forgotten ghost, a reminder that even the most powerful flavors can fade when the root of desire is stripped bare. The ghost of Roman kitchens was pungent, but the next vanished luxury promised a scent of pure, intoxicating beauty. The legendary rose oil of antiquity was not the light floral essence we know today. Ancient sources describe a substance of almost mythical potency, a thick, unctuous oil so concentrated that a single drop could perfume an entire courtyard. Its creation was an art of patience and precision, centered on the famed rose fields of Phoenicia and later, the territories around Carthage. The process, known as, involved layering countless rose petals with rare, purified animal fats. Over weeks, the fat would slowly absorb the volatile rose essence, capturing its soul. This saturated fat was then washed with alcohol to separate the precious oil, a yield so small it demanded entire fields of blossoms for just a few vials. This made the ultimate olfactory luxury, a scent that spoke of vast landscapes harvested for a single, perfect note. Its cultural power was immense. This was the signature fragrance of Cleopatra, who is said to have saturated the sails of her royal barge with it so the very winds would announce her arrival. At lavish Greek and Roman symposia, hosts would anoint their guests with a gesture of extreme hospitality that transformed the air itself into an experience of wealth. The scent was not merely pleasant, it was believed to possess an almost narcotic quality, a fragrance so powerful it could elevate mood and inspire conversation. It represented a zenith of botanical alchemy, where human skill collaborated with nature to capture a fleeting bloom in a permanent, potent form. The end of was not a sudden harvest, but a consequence of catastrophic political change. The utter destruction of Carthage by Rome in the year 146 before the Common Era did more than erase a city. It systematically dismantled an entire agricultural and knowledge system. The rose fields that supplied the petals, cultivated over generations for their specific aromatic profile, were razed or abandoned. The artisan communities who held the intricate knowledge of the process, the selection of fats, the timing of the harvest, were dispersed or lost. While rose cultivation continued elsewhere, the specific cultivars and the exact, labor-intensive art of making true vanished. Later perfumers could mimic a rose scent, but the thick, hypnotic oil described by poets, the one that could supposedly intoxicate a room, faded from the world. We are left with descriptions of its power, but the true essence, the scent that once defined an era of opulence, remains a fragrant ghost, a reminder that some luxuries are so deeply tied to a place and a people that they cannot survive the map being redrawn. The rose's intoxicating scent promised life, but the next color on our list was one of profound paradox, a pigment of breathtaking beauty born from a place of pure danger. Cinnabar, the mineral that produced the brilliant red vermilion of the ancient world, was a luxury painted in blood and poison. While mercury sulfide, its chemical name, still exists in the earth today, the specific cinnabar that powered an empire was more than a rock. It was an entire deadly economy centered on the mines in Spain. For the Romans, this was not merely a color, it was the visual language of power itself. The vibrant, opaque red was used to paint the lips and cheeks on marble portraits of emperors, bringing a flush of command to cold stone. It colored the walls of villas in stunning frescoes, and most significantly, it was used to paint the statues of the gods, a symbolic link between divine vitality and imperial authority. This red was blood, life, and sacred permanence, all captured in a powdered stone. But the source of this radiant symbol was a place of darkness. The mines were a horror. Mercury vapor, released during the mining and processing of the cinnabar ore, is a relentless and invisible poison, causing severe neurological damage, tremors, and madness over time. The Romans, understanding the peril, made this operation a state-controlled monopoly, staffed not by paid laborers, but by slaves and convicts who were sent into the tunnels with a life expectancy measured in months. This was an economy built on expendable lives, where human suffering was the direct cost of producing a pigment for the elite. The brilliance on a palace wall was the direct result of unimaginable hardship deep underground. The collapse of this specific luxury good was not the disappearance of the mineral, but the shattering of the brutal system that produced it. When the Roman administrative machine in the western provinces began to fracture in the 5th century, the organized, large-scale apparatus that managed the mines, secured the transport routes, and distributed the pigment to imperial workshops dissolved. The knowledge of large-scale, state-sponsored production faded. While smaller, local mining continued, the vast, deadly economy that supplied the entire Roman world with its signature red simply ceased to exist. The cultural meaning attached to that specific Roman vermilion, the way it was prepared and applied to convey absolute authority, faded with the empire that defined it. We can still find Cinnabar, but we can never truly recover the weight of meaning it once held, a color that shone so brightly precisely because its cost, in human terms, was so deliberately kept in the dark. Yet the most mysterious luxury of the ancient seas was not mined or harvested, but simply found, washed ashore like a gift from the gods. This was the original ambergris, a substance so strange its very origin was a subject of myth for centuries. Long before it was definitively linked to the sperm whale, this waxy treasure was known to Greco-Roman and Arab traders as ambergris, a name hinting at its perplexing nature. They prized it not as a curiosity, but as the ultimate fixative for perfumes, a magical ingredient that could make fleeting floral scents last for days, even weeks, on the skin. Beyond its olfactory power, it was revered as a near-miraculous medicine, prescribed for ailments of the heart and the mind, a panacea carried in the pouches of physicians and the coffers of kings. But here lies the core of the mystery, and the reason this specific luxury economy vanished. The ambergris of the ancient world almost certainly did not come from the sperm whales we know today. The primary hunting and trading grounds of those early networks were the Indian Ocean and the Red Sea, home to different whale species. The prized flotsam gold they collected likely originated from other, now rare or unidentified cetaceans, meaning the chemical signature, the scent profile, and even the medicinal properties recorded in ancient texts may refer to a substance we can no longer source. This knowledge was not written in ledgers, but etched into the lived experience of specific maritime communities. The ability to distinguish true ambergris from worthless sea foam or common fat, the lore of which moon phases brought the best pieces ashore, which remote beaches were the most fruitful after a storm. This was a silent science passed from father to son, from seasoned sailor to apprentice. These communities were the living libraries of this economy. Their decline, through a slow shift in trade routes, environmental change, or the simple fading of coastal traditions, did more than empty a village. It erased a unique database of ecological observation. Centuries later, when European whalers in the Atlantic perfected the hunting of the sperm whale and discovered ambergris within it, they effectively rebooted the trade, but on entirely new terms. The Atlantic product became the standard, and the ancient, secretive networks of the Indian Ocean, with their specific lore about a different treasure from different whales, dissolved into silence. We still have ambergris, but we lost the world that understood its first, most mysterious incarnation. The true scent of ancient perfumes, locked in with that lost variant of ambergris, is a fragrance we can no longer recreate, a ghost note in the recipes of history. The scent of ancient perfumes faded, but another treasure was forged in fire, a metal that sang when struck. Indian steel, known as Wootz, was not merely a material, it was a living art form born from earth and flame. Originating in the southern regions of the Indian subcontinent over 2,000 years ago, this steel was the secret heart of the world's most legendary blades, including the famed Damascus swords of the Middle East. Its value lay in a marriage of beauty and brutality, a distinctive, swirling surface pattern that looked like flowing water or rippling silk, paired with a legendary resilience that could supposedly slice through a floating scarf or shatter lesser blades. This was a luxury good measured in lethal elegance. The magic of Wootz was not magic at all, but a pinnacle of ancient material science. It began with specific iron ores from India, rich in trace elements like vanadium and carbon sources like cassia leaves or bamboo. These were combined in a sealed clay crucible and heated in a charcoal furnace for days. Inside that sealed vessel, a slow, controlled alchemy took place. The iron absorbed carbon unevenly, forming microscopic structures of ultra-hard cementite within a softer steel matrix. When a skilled smith finally forged the resulting ingot, these structures aligned, revealing that mesmerizing watery pattern, a direct map of its internal crystalline soul. Each ingot was a unique masterpiece of geology and craft. This made Wootz steel a premier export commodity for centuries. It was traded not as finished swords, but as these prepared ingots, known as cakes, shipped from Indian ports to forging centers in Persia, Syria, and beyond. The economic ecosystem was intricate. Local smithing guilds, often bound by caste and strict apprenticeship, held the complete oral knowledge of the process, which ore from which mine, which wood for the charcoal, the exact temperature cues judged by the color of the flame. Their workshops were universities of fire, and their product funded kingdoms. The disappearance of true Wootz is a story of fragile knowledge shattered by historical force. The decline began with the gradual erosion of the royal patrons, the Hindu and later Muslim kingdoms, who supported these specialized guilds. But the final blow was colonial. As British industrial power expanded into India, they systematically suppressed local, non-standardized manufacturing to serve their own mass production models. The guild structures dissolved, the apprentices found no work, and the oral recipes, never written down, evaporated within a generation or two. The furnaces grew cold, and the specific knowledge of how to talk to that particular fire was silenced. Modern metallurgists, armed with electron microscopes, have decoded much of Wootz's physical secret. They can recreate the pattern, the chemical composition. But the true art, the nuanced, sensory skill of the master smith who could consistently produce the legendary quality described in centuries of awestruck accounts, that is the ghost. We possess the sheet music, but the voice of the musician, the one that made the metal sing, is lost to the silence of a disrupted world. It stands as a profound lesson that the greatest luxury is sometimes not the object itself, but the irreplaceable human tradition that breathes life into it. The steel that sang held a pattern like water, but the next treasure captured light itself in a layer of clay. Centuries before Chinese porcelain became the world's standard, a different kind of ceramic defined luxury across the Mediterranean. In the thriving cities of the Abbasid Caliphate, like Basra in Iraq, master potters achieved something miraculous. They created what scholars now call Islamic porcelain, a soft-paste pottery so fine and luminous it rivaled the most coveted imports from distant China. This was not a mere copy, it was a brilliant reinvention. Using local clays and relentless innovation, these artisans developed a style entirely their own. Their most stunning achievement was a glaze with a metallic luster, a finish that shimmered with an otherworldly, iridescent glow, shifting between copper, gold, and emerald depending on the light. Combined with vivid cobalt blue designs, these pieces were objects of pure enchantment. To own a bowl from Basra was to possess a fragment of captured light, a clear signal of immense wealth and sophisticated taste from Spain to Syria. The economy supporting this art was a testament to the Caliphate's golden age. Vast workshops, or kilns, operated as complex industrial centers, fueling a robust export trade. The knowledge behind the luster glaze was particularly precious, a closely guarded alchemy involving specific metallic compounds and a precise, smoky third firing in the kiln. This technique was not written in a book. It lived in the hands and minds of master potters and their apprentices, passed down through generations in a continuous chain of practice. The end of this tradition was as sudden as it was total. In the year 1258, the Mongol armies reached Baghdad. The siege and subsequent sacking of the city was a catastrophe of historic scale, a devastating event that shattered the heart of the Islamic world. The kilns of Basra and other centers were not just damaged, they were systematically destroyed. The artisan communities, the living libraries of this ceramic science, were scattered, displaced, or lost. In that chaos, the fragile chain of transmission was broken forever. The exact recipes for those iridescent glazes, the specific temperatures, the preparation of the clays, all evaporated in the smoke. When trade routes eventually stabilized, the global market's desire for fine ceramics remained, but the supply had changed. Chinese hard-paste porcelain, with its own very different strengths, flowed into the vacuum, eventually becoming synonymous with luxury dinnerware worldwide. The brilliant, luminous pottery of the Abbasid world faded from memory, becoming a ghost in the archaeological record. We can admire its beauty in museum cases today, but the living art, the full knowledge of how to make it, is a silent kiln. Its disappearance allowed one ceramic narrative to dominate, completely erasing the memory of a rival tradition that once made light dance on the surface of a cup. The luminous pottery of the Abbasid world was a marvel of controlled fire, but the most legendary scents of antiquity were gifts from a land that existed only in whispers. For over 1,000 years, the civilization of ancient Egypt spoke of a mysterious partner in trade, a distant and blessed realm known only as Punt. This was not a neighboring kingdom, but a semi-mythical source of divine abundance, the original supplier of the sacred materials that made Egypt itself smell holy. Egyptian records, carved in stone on temple walls, show envoys returning from Punt with treasures that seem almost magical: stacks of fragrant resins, logs of precious ebony, sacks of gold, and living, potted incense trees, their roots carefully bound for the long voyage down the Nile. Among these gifts, the most personal and profound were the specialized perfumes and unguents of Punt, ointments and oils blended from recipes Egypt did not possess. While the Egyptians were masters of using frankincense and myrrh, the perfumers of Punt seemingly knew how to combine these sacred resins with rare, volatile oils from exotic African flora, creating signature scents that could not be replicated back home. These were not commercial products, they were state gifts, divine offerings meant to anoint the pharaoh and please the gods themselves. The aroma of a perfume in an Egyptian temple was the smell of diplomatic triumph and cosmic favor. Yet the location of this fabled land was a secret closely guarded by the traders and sailors who made the journey. For centuries, scholars have debated its whereabouts, with the best evidence pointing to the coastal regions of the Horn of Africa, perhaps modern-day Eritrea, Djibouti, or Somalia. This was not a place you could find on a public map. It was a destination known only through oral sailing directions, a knowledge that made the intermediaries fabulously wealthy and powerful. The entire economy of this luxury trade was built on this intentional mystery. The decline of this trade network is a story of fading power and forgotten pathways. As the New Kingdom period of Egypt drew to a close around 1070 before the Common Era, the centralized authority and naval capability needed to mount these major, state-sponsored expeditions to a distant coast simply evaporated. Political instability turned attention inward, and the great trading partnerships that required royal patronage and secure sea lanes slowly withered. With the end of direct contact, the specific knowledge dissolved. The exact recipes for those legendary unguents, the precise proportions of resins to oils, the identity of the rare African botanicals that gave them their unique character, were lost. Even the living incense trees, once transplanted in Egyptian temple gardens, likely died out without their native caretakers or a continuous supply of new saplings. The perfumes of Punt did not fade because the ingredients vanished from the earth, but because the cultural and economic bridge that carried them collapsed. We are left with stone carvings of people carrying jars and lists of wondrous goods, but the scents those jars contained are ghosts. Their disappearance means an entire olfactory dimension of ancient ritual and diplomacy is closed to us forever, a reminder that some luxuries are so deeply entwined with a single, fragile connection that severing that tie is like silencing a unique language of scent. But the story of ancient purple is not a single thread. It is a tapestry woven from many local dyes. Far from the Mediterranean sun, in the misty forests, and along the rugged Atlantic coasts of pre-Roman Gaul, a different kind of purple colored the dreams of power. This was the purple of Gaul, a vibrant hue born not from the murex, but from a humble local source, perhaps a specific shellfish from the northern shores or a hardy lichen scraped from coastal rocks. Its exact botanical or zoological origin remains one of archaeology's quiet puzzles, but its cultural impact is clear. This dye was the signature of Celtic elites, coloring the intricate woven patterns of cloaks and tunics that denoted status across Iron Age Europe. To wear this Gallic purple was to proclaim a local identity, a connection to the land and its spirits, and membership in a warrior aristocracy whose wealth was measured in herds, metalwork, and the brilliance of their cloth. This was not a global commodity, but a regional engine of prestige fueling trade networks that moved luxury goods like amber and wine deep into the continent. The knowledge of how to produce it, which season to harvest, how to prepare the vats, what mordants to use to fix the color to the wool, was a craft passed through generations, a form of cultural capital as valuable as any sword. The conquest of Gaul by Julius Caesar in the 1st century before the Common Era did more than redraw a map. It systematically dismantled this entire aesthetic economy. Rome brought with it a standardized idea of luxury. The superior, indelible Tyrian purple, a color directly associated with imperial authority, became the new visual language of power. Local elites seeking to integrate into the Roman system would have abandoned their traditional dyes in favor of imported Mediterranean fabrics and colors, a deliberate signal of assimilation. The economic incentive to produce the local purple evaporated almost overnight. The workshops that once supplied chieftains were abandoned, and the intricate oral knowledge of the craft, never deemed important enough to write down by Roman historians, began to fade from memory. Within a few generations, the specific techniques were lost, suppressed not by violence, but by the overwhelming cultural and market pressure of a homogenizing empire. The vibrant purple that once defined a continent's aristocracy became a ghost color, leaving behind only faint stains on ancient metal brooches and the whispers of its description in a few classical texts. Its disappearance is a different kind of loss than the extinction of. It is a story of cultural absorption, where a local language of beauty was silenced not because its source died out, but because the world that gave it meaning was deliberately erased and replaced. The purple of Gaul was erased by an empire's taste, but some ancient luxuries thrived on a different kind of power, the power of a beautiful lie. For centuries, the Greeks and Romans cherished a spice they called cinnamon, but it was almost certainly not the true cinnamon we know today. The bark that reached their markets was something rarer and more mysterious, likely a close relative from the forests of southern China or the distant Himalayas. Its journey to the Mediterranean was a masterpiece of obfuscation. Arab and Indian traders, the middlemen of this ancient economy, spun elaborate tales to protect their lucrative monopoly. They spoke of dangerous lands guarded by winged serpents, and of the spice being harvested from the nests of giant birds, the mythical stories so vividly recorded by Herodotus that they were accepted as fact. This intentional mystery was the source of its value. By shrouding its origin in myth, traders could inflate its price to astonishing levels, making it worth many times its weight in silver. Its use reflected this supreme status. This precious bark was not merely a kitchen spice, it was a sacred substance. The Romans burned it in vast quantities on the funeral pyres of their emperors, believing its rich, sweet smoke carried the soul of the ruler to the afterlife. It was a central ingredient in the most lavish religious rites, a fragrant offering meant to please the gods themselves. This cinnamon was less a flavor and more a scent of transcendence, a direct aromatic line to the divine. Its disappearance was not an extinction, but a demystification. In the late Roman period, as direct maritime trade with Sri and India expanded, the veil was finally lifted. Sailors and merchants saw the true cinnamon tree and the more common, pungent cassia bark. With the myth exposed, the market adjusted. The more readily available cassia and the true, milder Ceylon cinnamon gradually replaced the legendary, myth-shrouded original in commerce. The specific, perhaps more aromatic bark that had traveled with a story of giant birds ceased to be a distinct, hyper-valuable commodity. It was absorbed into the broader category of cinnamon, its unique identity and the elaborate tales that gave it such profound cultural weight simply faded away. The loss here is not of a plant, but of a narrative. We lost the specific spice that made an empire's farewells smell sacred, because we finally learned where it actually came from. Sometimes, a luxury vanishes the moment the magic is explained. The myth of cinnamon vanished with a map, but some ancient arts were lost to the very ground they sprang from. While the lacquer of China and Japan is a celebrated tradition that survives, a parallel world of lacquer once existed far to the west, in the heart of ancient Persia and Mesopotamia. This was not an import, but a homegrown luxury born from the sap of local trees, a distinct chemical cousin to its East Asian counterpart. Master artisans transformed this precious resin into objects of breathtaking opulence, luxury boxes with lids that fit with a whisper, ceremonial furniture that gleamed under torchlight, and even architectural panels that adorned the palaces of kings. The height of this craft was reached under the Sasanian Empire, where it became a visual language of imperial power. The true magic lay in the decoration. Artists would inlay the hardened lacquer surface with delicate filigrees of gold, slivers of ivory, and fragments of vibrant turquoise, creating intricate scenes of royal hunts, mythical beasts, and celestial patterns. A single piece was a microcosm of the empire's wealth, a layered world of organic chemistry and meticulous artistry. The value of this lacquer went far beyond its beauty. It was a technological marvel. The knowledge of which regional tree to tap, the precise season to harvest its sap, and the complex, multi-step process of refining it into a stable, glass-like coating was a guarded science. Even more secret were the recipes for the pigments ground into the resin itself, producing colors of a specific depth and luminosity that could withstand the centuries. This was an economy of specialized guilds, supporting harvesters, chemists, and master inlay artists in a continuous chain of creation. Its disappearance was not a sudden conquest, but a slow fading under the weight of a profound cultural shift. The Islamic conquests of the 7th century introduced new artistic philosophies and preferences. The vibrant figurative scenes of the Sasanian court, so central to their lacquerwork, gradually fell out of favor in many circles, replaced by the geometric and calligraphic arts that define the new era. As royal patronage for the old forms dwindled, the economic foundation for these specialized workshops crumbled. The guilds dissolved, and the apprentices turned to new crafts. The silent, gradual loss was one of intimate, hands-on knowledge. The specific trees were forgotten, the refining techniques vanished from memory, and those vibrant pigment recipes, never written in a formal text, evaporated. Today, we know of this magnificent tradition primarily through scant, fragile fragments found by archaeologists, tiny chips of colored resin clinging to a rusted piece of metal or a fragment of wood. We can analyze their chemistry, but we cannot replicate the living art. The lacquer of the Middle East stands as a ghost of a parallel path, a reminder that even the most sophisticated material traditions can vanish when the culture that breathes life into them turns its gaze and its desire toward a new aesthetic horizon. The green fire of chrysolite was a gemstone born from a volcano under the sea. On a barren, sun-scorched island in the Red Sea called, the earth yielded a unique treasure, a vibrant olive-green crystal known to the ancients as chrysolite, what we call peridot today. This was not a gem found in riverbeds or traded from distant, unknown lands. It was mined from the rock of a single, specific, and brutally inhospitable place. For the Ptolemaic kings of Egypt and later for Rome, controlling this island meant controlling the supply of a color that captured the essence of spring leaves and clear, shallow tropical water. The value of these stones was multifaceted. Their beauty was undeniable, but their power was believed to be supernatural. Ancient lapidaries, the books of gemstone lore, claimed that chrysolite could ward off night terrors and evil spirits when set in gold, offering the wearer a peaceful sleep free from dark dreams. This made it more than an ornament. It was a form of knightly armor for the elite, a tangible piece of security against the fears of the unconscious mind. To own a peridot was to possess a fragment of a protected island and a guardian against the dark. The economy of this green fire was a marvel of perilous logistics. Island was a waterless, shadeless rock in a relentless sea. Mining operations, there were a seasonal and grueling undertaking. Workers would be shipped in during the cooler months, battling the elements to extract the crystals from the hard rock, only to be evacuated before the summer heat made the island utterly uninhabitable. The raw stones were then transported to Alexandria, the great emporium of the ancient world, where master cutters and jewelers transformed them into finished pieces for an international clientele. This entire fragile pipeline, from the desolate mine to the cosmopolitan showroom, depended entirely on one thing: absolute Roman control of the Red Sea trade routes. The Roman navy kept pirates at bay and ensured the merchant galleys could move between the Egyptian ports and the Indian Ocean in relative safety. The wealth generated was significant, funding the local governors and merchants who managed the trade and feeding the endless Roman appetite for new and exotic luxuries. The collapse of this green gemstone economy was a direct result of that maritime security unraveling. As the Roman Empire began to fracture in the 3rd and 4th centuries, its ability to project power into distant seas like the Red Sea diminished. Naval patrols became less frequent, and the routes grew dangerous. Pirates and rival regional powers began to threaten the merchant ships, making the specific, risky journey to a remote island less and less viable. The final blow was likely economic. With the costs and dangers of the operation skyrocketing and the central Roman market becoming unstable, the mines were simply abandoned. The workers left, the tools were gathered, and the island was left to the seabirds. In the West, the memory of this specific source, this island of green fire, faded into obscurity. The name chrysolite remained in texts, but its connection to a real place was lost. For centuries in medieval Europe, any green stone might be called chrysolite, but the true, vivid peridot vanished from commerce and recognition. It became a ghost gem, a color described in old books but no longer seen in new jewelry. Its rediscovery much later was a surprise, a re-identification of a forgotten landscape with a legendary name. The story of chrysolite reminds us that some luxuries are so tightly bound to a single, precarious point on the map that when the line to that point is cut, the treasure itself disappears from the world's memory, waiting centuries for someone to find the map again. The green fire of chrysolite depended on a single island, but the next treasure was a sacred smoke that required an entire kingdom to prepare. The wealth of the fabled kingdom of Saba, known to us as Sheba, was legendary, built upon the golden tears of the trees, frankincense, and myrrh. Yet beyond these famous raw resins lay a deeper secret, a more refined luxury, the sacred incense of Sheba. This was not simply a bag of fragrant gum. It was a precise ritual formulation, a blended incense prepared by specialized priestly castes for use in the most solemn temple ceremonies across the ancient world. Imagine a master perfumer, but one whose client was a god. These blends likely incorporated not only the finest grades of frankincense and myrrh, but also rare, local Arabian spices, exotic gums, and perhaps even minute amounts of precious oils. each ingredient chosen for its symbolic resonance as much as its aroma. The recipe was a form of prayer in itself, a chemical liturgy meant to produce a specific scent profile that would be pleasing to a particular deity. The smoke that curled upward in the Temple of Jerusalem, or in the great ziggurats of Babylon, or before the altars of Rome, often began as a sacred composite mixed in the workshops of southern Arabia. This made the Sabaeans more than traders. They were the apothecaries of the divine, holding a monopoly on the very smell of holiness. Their economy was not just moving raw materials, it was exporting a complete spiritual experience. The knowledge behind these blends was the true commodity, guarded more closely than any map to a mine. It lived in the hands and memories of the blending priests, passed down through generations within families or closed orders. This was an oral tradition of scent, a science of sacred aromatics that was never written down in a form we can recover. The disappearance of this luxury is a story of a network unraveling. The slow decline of the overland incense routes, as Roman preferences shifted toward sea trade, began to weaken the economic foundations of the Sabaean kingdom. But the final dissolution came with political and environmental shifts in the region around the 6th century after the Common Era. As the kingdom fragmented and its central authority faded, the structured, state-supported systems that maintained the priestly castes and their workshops collapsed. The guardians of the recipes were dispersed, their social role made obsolete by new faiths and new powers. The intricate knowledge of which gum to combine with which spice, in what proportion, for which god, evaporated into the dry desert air. We can still burn frankincense today, and we can guess at the ingredients. But the exact scent that once filled the Holy of Holies, the specific aromatic signature that ancient believed carried their prayers directly to the ears of heaven, is gone. It is a vanished olfactory prayer, a silent hymn whose notes we can no longer hear. The loss reminds us that some luxuries are not physical objects, but performances, and when the performers and their stage are gone, the art itself becomes a ghost, leaving only the memory of a fragrance that once connected earth to the sky. While the incense of Sheba was a sacred smoke, a different kind of light was woven into the very fabric of a mountain kingdom. In the rugged mountains of ancient Dacia, gold was not just for coins or crowns, it was meant to be worn like sunlight. The Dacians, a formidable culture in what is now Romania, were unparalleled masters of metallurgy, and their crowning achievement was not a solid object but a thread. They developed a method for drawing gold wire to an astonishing hair-like fineness, a technological feat that left even their sophisticated Roman neighbors in awe. This was not wire for jewelry, but for the loom. They wove and embroidered with it, creating ceremonial garments for their nobility and priesthood that did not merely reflect light. They seemed to generate it from within, each movement releasing a shimmering cascade of metallic radiance. To see a Dacian high priest in his full regalia would have been to witness a man seemingly clothed in captured fire, a walking symbol of divine favor and earthly authority spun from precious metal. The production of this thread was far more than a craft, it was a culturally encoded art. The knowledge of which local gold ore yielded the most malleable metal, the precise annealing temperatures, and the specialized tools for drawing it to such impossible thinness without breaking, represented a deep scientific understanding passed through generations of artisans. This unique textile defined Dacian elite identity, setting them visually and technologically apart from the entire classical world. Their wealth was literally woven into their ceremonial dress. The end of this radiant tradition came with the sound of marching legions. Following prolonged, brutal wars, the Roman Emperor Trajan finally conquered Dacia in the year 106. The Roman victory was comprehensive, aimed at dismantling the Dacian state and absorbing its rich gold mines into the imperial treasury. In this systematic absorption, the culturally specific luxury of the gold wire thread could not survive. The organized workshops that supplied the Dacian court were disbanded. The artisan class, so vital to a now vanquished culture, was dispersed, enslaved, or redirected. The Romans, practical in their plunder, valued the raw gold far more than the delicate cultural application it had served. While some technical knowledge may have seeped into broader Roman metalworking, the specific, sacred purpose, the creation of luminous textiles as a core expression of Dacian power and piety, was erased. The shimmer that had defined a kingdom was extinguished, not because the gold was gone, but because the world that gave the thread its meaning was deliberately unraveled and rewoven into the fabric of an empire that had no need for its unique light. The shimmering gold of Dacia was extinguished by an empire's conquest, but a far older luxury met its end not by human hands, but by the fire of the earth itself. On the sun-drenched island of Crete, the brilliant Minoan civilization painted a world of grace and sophistication, and at the heart of their art and economy bloomed a delicate purple flower. Minoan saffron was not merely a spice. It was a versatile treasure woven into the very fabric of their culture, as captured in the famous Saffron Gatherer fresco from the Palace of Knossos. This vibrant artwork shows a young man, perhaps a priest or a royal servant, carefully plucking the crimson stigmas from crocus flowers, a task of such importance it was immortalized on a palace wall. For the Minoans, saffron's value was threefold. Its stamens produced a luminous golden yellow dye for coloring the luxurious textiles worn by the elite. It was also a powerful medicine, noted in later Greek texts for its use in treating ailments. And many scholars believe its vivid color and psychoactive properties linked it to their vivid religious rituals, a sacred substance that bridged the human and divine worlds. This made Minoan saffron one of the Mediterranean's first true luxury exports, a prestige good traded from their advanced palaces to the eager kingdoms of Egypt and the Near East. Its cultivation was a specialized agricultural art, a knowledge refined over generations to coax the best yield and the most potent color from the Cretan soil. This entire world of delicate commerce and sacred harvest was living on borrowed time, built in the shadow of a sleeping giant. The cataclysm came from the sea. The colossal volcanic eruption of Thera, modern Santorini, around the year 1600 before the Common Era, was one of the most powerful natural events in human history. It was not a single moment, but a cascading disaster. A towering tsunami devastated the northern coasts of Crete, smashing the Minoan fleet, their source of power and trade. Immense clouds of volcanic ash blanketed the island, smothering fields and poisoning the land for years. The climate itself was altered, leading to failed harvests and societal collapse. The intricate palace economies, with their centralized storage and distribution of goods like saffron, shattered completely. The specific strain of crocus the Minoans had perfected, the precise methods for its cultivation and processing, and its deep cultural role in their ceremonies were all lost in the chaos. While saffron would later be rediscovered and cultivated famously in Persia and Kashmir, the Minoan tradition was utterly erased. What remains are ghosts in the archaeological record, the silent frescoes of gatherers, and the faint chemical traces of yellow dye on fragments of ancient pottery. Their saffron is a ghost luxury, a reminder that the most refined human arts can be undone in a day by the indifferent power of the planet, leaving only art as a clue to what was once considered priceless. The ash that buried Minoan saffron silenced one civilization's voice, but another ancient kingdom found its voice not in a flower, but in the skin of an animal. In the 2nd century before the Common Era, a quiet war was fought not with swords, but with knowledge. The Ptolemies of Egypt, masters of the legendary library of Alexandria, held a powerful monopoly over the very medium of thought, papyrus. When their rival, the Attalid kings of Asia Minor, began building a library to rival their own, Egypt responded with a sweeping embargo, halting all exports of papyrus scrolls. This was an attempt to strangle a rival's intellectual ambition at its source. Its response was not surrender, but stunning innovation. Faced with a shortage, their artisans perfected an ancient technique to an unprecedented degree, creating a new writing surface from prepared animal skins, known as charta or parchment. This early parchment, however, was a world apart from the thick, sometimes coarse material we associate with medieval manuscripts. It was a luxury good of the highest order. Crafted primarily from the delicate skins of stillborn or very young calves, the process was an exercise in patience and precision. The skins were washed, limed, scraped of all hair and flesh, then stretched on frames to dry under tension. They were smoothed with pumice and chalk, resulting in a surface that was remarkably thin, strong, and flawlessly smooth, accepting ink without blotting and providing a luminous, creamy backdrop for text. This was not a mere substitute for papyrus. It was a superior product for the most important documents, a prestige material for royal decrees, sacred texts, and the treasured volumes of the library itself. Its durability meant knowledge could, in theory, last for centuries, a tangible promise of legacy for a rising kingdom. The art of producing this supreme parchment was a localized, specialized craft, intimately tied to the patronage and specific needs of the Attalid court. The knowledge of which calves yielded the finest grain, the exact tension required on the stretching frames, and the secret formulas for the smoothing compounds were closely held by guilds of artisans. Their product was a symbol of intellectual independence and its defiance of Egyptian control, a physical embodiment of a kingdom's determination to write its own history. This delicate ecosystem of quality could not survive political upheaval. When the last Attalid king bequeathed his kingdom to the Roman Republic in 133 before the Common Era, the focused royal patronage that demanded and funded such exquisite craftsmanship evaporated. Rome, with its vast bureaucratic needs, required a standardized, mass-produced commodity. Parchment production scaled up, but in the process, the exquisite quality was inevitably diluted. The skins of older animals were used, processes were streamlined for volume, and the pursuit of sheer perfection gave way to practical utility. The finest paper of a did not so much disappear as it was absorbed and homogenized. The specific art of making the supple, calfskin luxury that could rival papyrus for elite use faded, its secrets dissolving into the broader, more utilitarian trade of medieval parchment making. What was lost was not the material itself, but a particular zenith of its form, a moment when a kingdom under siege by a knowledge embargo answered not with a scroll of papyrus, but with a blank page of its own magnificent invention. The story of parchment is a final, poignant lesson in this series, a reminder that luxury is often found in the refinement of necessity, and that the highest quality can be the first casualty when a bespoke art is forced to serve an empire's scale. These vanished treasures leave behind more than empty spaces on a shelf. They reveal a stark anatomy of loss. Each disappearance, from the purple of emperors to the scent of sacred smoke, tells a story that fits into one of 5 recurring patterns, a cycle of fragility that repeated itself across. The first and most direct is loving a rarity to death, as we saw with and the true. These were wild gifts that could not be farmed, and the market's hunger simply consumed them whole. The second pattern is the loss of secret techniques, where the true luxury was not the material, but the irreplaceable human knowledge to transform it. The singing steel of Wootz, the luminous glaze of Islamic porcelain, and the sacred blue of did not vanish from the earth. They vanished from human memory when the guilds dissolved and the apprentices found no one to teach. The third force is geopolitical collapse, where entire trade networks and the civilizations that built them shattered. The royal purple of Gaul faded under Roman conquest, the incense of Sheba lost its prayers when the kingdom fragmented, and the green fire of chrysolite went dark when Roman galleys no longer patrolled the Red Sea. A luxury cannot survive when its map is erased. The fourth driver is a simple shift in taste and substitution. The myth-shrouded cinnamon of Rome was demystified by direct trade, replaced by more common varieties, while the pungent stepped in for the extinct, a shadow filling a void. The final, profound pattern is the unsustainable supply chain, a system so complex and precarious that it could not withstand a single shock. The gold thread textiles of Dacia required an entire kingdom's cultural framework, and the perfumes of Punt depended on a single, secret diplomatic bridge across the sea. When those supports fell, the luxury evaporated. Beneath these patterns lies a deeper, unsettling truth. These economies were not built on robust foundations of trade, but on the very pillars of their own exclusivity, ecological specificity, and artisanal secrecy. Their value was their scarcity, and that scarcity made them profoundly vulnerable. The disappearance of these items so often coincided with the twilight of the civilizations that cherished them, because luxury was not a superficial add-on. It was woven into the fabric of cultural identity and political power. To lose the color of your emperors, the scent of your gods, or the song of your forges was to lose a piece of your world's soul, a visual, olfactory, and tactile language of meaning that simply could not be translated after the fall. This history holds up a mirror to our own age of desire. We may no longer chase the dye of a sea snail, but we build our devices around rare earth minerals extracted from a handful of politically volatile regions, and our most advanced technologies depend on artisanal knowledge held in a few specialized silicon forges. Our digital networks are as fragile as any incense root, vulnerable to fracture. The question this journey forces us to ask is not about the past, but about the future. Are our modern luxury economies, for all their global scale and digital sheen, any more durable? Or are we, like the Romans burning mythical cinnamon or the Sabaeans blending sacred smoke, simply building new worlds of wonder on the same ancient, fragile ground? These lost colors, scents, and textures leave us with a haunting legacy. From the imperial purple of a sea snail to the luminous paper of a defiant kingdom, these 20 vanished luxuries reveal a single, profound truth. The engines that drove ancient economies were often fueled by the ephemeral. Their stories whisper that value is not an inherent property of an object, but a narrative we collectively agree to believe, a fragile story woven from desire, symbolism, and exclusive access. When that narrative ends, when the last master artisan takes their secret to the grave, or when the final grove of a wild plant is stripped bare, an entire world of wealth can simply fade from tangible reality into memory. Their physical forms are gone, but their echoes are everywhere. They live on in our language, in words like purple that still carry a hint of royalty, and in our art, where we still strive to capture that lost sacred blue or mimic the watery pattern of legendary steel. They persist in our endless, human pursuit of the rare and the beautiful, a drive that continues to shape our world in ways both wondrous and perilous. Let this exploration be more than a catalog of ghosts. Let it be a call to appreciate not merely the luxury object itself, but to see the intricate, fragile web that creates it, the human hands that craft it, the specific ecology that yields it, and the cultural story that breathes meaning into it. When we understand that a scent or a color is the product of an entire living network, we begin to see the true cost of its loss, and perhaps we learn to value what we have before it becomes a whisper in a history book. If you found this journey into the lost economies of desire fascinating, consider subscribing for more deep dives into the forgotten corners of our shared past. And we would love to hear your thoughts. Which of these vanished goods do you wish you could experience for yourself today? Share your choice in the comments below.